Welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, Thursday, September 14th. We have author David Vaught with us. David will be speaking about his relatively new book on Gaylord Perry, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. Before then, I just want to go over a few things with you. Rick Swig attended the Giant game yesterday, and they pre-celebrated Orlando Cepeda's 86th birthday, and he asked me if I would show you this lovely picture of Orlando. There he is. I believe his birthday, he turns 86, I believe, on Sunday maybe, or Saturday, this weekend. So we will have another author talking about Cepeda, and hopefully Rick will be able to get to Orlando's house. Maybe he could join us. We shall see.
His nickname is Cha-Cha.
That's correct.
You're right.
We were scheduled to have a Zoom next Thursday. Unfortunately, the speaker, Noel Hine, had to cancel. We rescheduled it for January. I will attempt to get somebody else. If not, we'll see each other in 2 weeks. But I just want to let you know that.
Gary, go easy on yourself. You work.
Thanks, Frank. Next Saturday, there's the centennial anniversary at the Polo Grounds regarding a historic boxing match. I sent out stuff to you guys. If you could, if anybody wants to attend, just let them know you're coming. And after I got that, I got very ticked off. As Renee knows, I have spoken to people at the grounds there, and they told me they were going to honor Willie Mays and they were going to fix the signage, and they did neither. So I wrote them a curt letter saying, I guess none of this stuff's coming to fruition. If you're going to include me in emails and email me regarding the group, then email me saying you're not going to do anything. It's okay if they don't do anything, but we were all led to believe that something might happen. And John Miller's there complaining, and people are listening, and just nothing got done. So for all the Jewish friends here, Happy New Year. I also sent out, I re-upped with Zoom, so we're good for at least another year, up to 2024. And if anybody else has any other questions or anything, feel free to chime in at any time. But for tonight, I would like to welcome David Vaught. David has a relatively new book called Spitter, Baseball's Notorious Gaylord Perry. Gaylord Perry would have celebrated his 85th birthday, I believe tomorrow, September 15th. He is a beloved player in San Francisco Giant history, and I know we're a New York group, but we also love the legendary players from San Francisco, especially the ones in the 1960s. So without further ado, I will turn the program over to David Vaught. David, welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Gary. Hello, everyone. Spinner was a real labor of love for me, so thanks very much for your interest in the book. I'm going to start by laying out the book's central theme and narrative arc, and then I'll touch on a few of the main supporting storylines. Gaylord's career stats, his upbringing, race relations on the Giants in the 1960s, the Perry McDowell trade, his lifelong sibling rivalry with brother Jim, and his legacy. Then I'll take your questions. Okay, here we go. Gaylord Jackson Perry threw a spitter for the first but hardly the last time in his career on the night of May 31st, 1964. Before a record Shea Stadium crowd of 57,037. The circumstances were dire. San Francisco Giants and New York Mets, in the second game of the longest doubleheader in Major League history, nearly 10 hours of playing time, were locked in a 6-6 tie in the bottom of the 13th inning. Giants manager Alvin Dark waved Perry in from the bullpen with little confidence. He was the 11th pitcher on the Giants' 11-man pitching staff, and the only option left, except for Bob Henley, who was supposed to start the next day. With 6 years in and out of the minors, an ordinary fastball and an inconsistent curve, and an earned run average of 4.77 in just 7 appearances so far that year, the 25-year-old Perry had every reason to believe that his career hung in the balance. So too did his catcher, Tom Haller, who upon greeting Perry on the mound after 2 shaky innings said simply, "Gaylord, it's time to try it out." They both knew what he meant. Under the tutelage of teammate Bob Shaw and Giants minor league pitching coach Frank Schellenbach, Perry had been diligently working on his special and illegal pitch for over a year. How to load it up, how big a load the ball would carry, where to drop the load, how to grip the ball, how to release it, how to control it, and how to hide it from the 4 umpires and the entire opposing team. "We're not high school boys anymore," Shaw told him in no uncertain terms. "Hitters are taking the bread out of your mouth." Bread had always been an issue for Perry. The son of a tobacco sharecropper in eastern North Carolina, Perry learned to survive by whatever means necessary. As he came of age in the 1940s and 1950s, tobacco farming remained pre-modern, unmechanized, labor-intensive, and poverty-stricken. The Perry family's yearly routine demanded hard, unrelenting work and afforded few pleasures, baseball chief among them. Throughout his major league career, Perry would again learn to survive by whatever means necessary. "In this game," he said in a rare moment of candor, "in this game, you got to do what it takes. If it takes being mean, you be mean. If it takes brushing a hitter back, you brush him back. If it takes being wet, you moisten up." And sure enough, with his spitter splashing in Haller's mitt, Perry pitched 10 scoreless innings of relief that night to beat the Mets, finished the 1964 season with 12 victories as a starter, and went on to become one of the premier pitchers of his generation. Perry returned to his farming roots and Southern way of life, even before retiring from the game in 1983. But this time, his survival skills met with disaster. Overextended and deeply in debt, he could not prevent his 410-acre farm from failing in 1986 during the decade's devastating agricultural crisis. Baseball had offered Perry an outlet for the tensions of rural life and a means of translating a core set of values into action. But prosperity on the farm, he learned, depended on a much crueler reality. It rested not just on hard work, determination, and resiliency, but on favorable market conditions, over which, unlike the spitter, he had no control. So my hope is that readers will get to know, up close and personal, a life rich in human interest and a personality of considerable complexity. Before, during, and after his career in baseball, Perry cleaved to the values and approach to life instilled in him as a tenant farmer's boy. Outspoken, cocky, and intensely loyal, he was also moody, impulsive with money, and inclined to be surly. His fiercely competitive nature defined him as both a pitcher and a farmer. And his 314 wins, 3,534 strikeouts, 303 complete games and 690 starts, 5,350 innings, and 2 Cy Young Awards, one in each league, propelled him into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But it was the spitter, even more so, that made Perry famous or infamous, depending on one's perspective. He became the poster child for the well-known baseball player's maxim, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. Let me talk a bit about Perry's career stats. Perry, I think, is one of the more underappreciated Hall of Famers, and I hope the book helps to change that. Let me emphasize two of his career stats besides his 314 wins. Almost no one remembers him as a strikeout pitcher. Remember, he had 3,534. And in fact, he broke Walter Johnson's all-time record in 1983, a record that had long been considered insurmountable. Coincidentally, both Nolan Ryan and Steve Carlton also broke the record the same year Gaylord did. And of course, Ryan went on to obliterate it, 5,700 strikeouts. But for Perry, that's more wins and more strikeouts than contemporary Hall of Famers Tom Seaver, Bob Gibson, Jim Palmer, and Don Drysdale. Most striking of all, I think, Perry pitched 5,350 innings, with at least 200 innings in 17 seasons, and 300 6 times. By comparison, Seaver threw 4,700 innings, Palmer 3,900, Gibson 3,800, Drysdale 3,400. If you put aside the real old-timers like Cy Young and Walter Johnson, that puts Perry third all-time, and just 54 innings behind Phil Niekro, and just 36 fewer than Ryan. But Niekro threw the low-stress knuckleball, and Ryan pitched 5 years longer than Gaylord. So one could make the case that Gaylord is baseball's all-time workhorse in the modern era, certainly among the top three, and thus a competitor second to none. What's more, Perry missed only 6 starts over the course of his 22-year big league career and never suffered a sore arm. And he was a late bloomer. More than 200 of his wins and 4,000 of his innings came after the age of 30. A lot of people remember Perry only in the latter stages of his career, old, fat, and grumpy, moving from one bad team to another in desperate pursuit of 300 wins. All true, but he was so much more than that. His upbringing. From where did Gaylord get his fiercely competitive nature, durability, and work ethic? On the farm in the tobacco belt of eastern North Carolina. Gaylord's parents were sharecroppers, a system of labor that had not changed since the Civil War. As he came of age in the 1940s and 1950s, tobacco farming remained pre-modern, unmechanized, labor-intensive, and poverty-stricken, with no electricity or indoor plumbing. Gaylord and his older brother Jim were first and foremost farm laborers, taking on full adult responsibilities starting at the age of 7, including driving a plow behind 2 mules. Hard was the operative word. Hard work, hard conditions, hard times. Life afforded few pleasures, baseball chief among them. The Perry men played hard too, using balls made from rocks, tape, and rolled up stockings, oak roots for bats, and one worn out fielder's glove between them. Gaylord, Jim, and their father played baseball whenever they could find the time. For an hour at lunch, before nightfall, and on Sunday afternoons after church. Their father drove the boys just as hard on the baseball field as in the tobacco field. As he put it, being poor, the boys knew how to apply themselves to work. They knew it was important to learn the right way to do a job before you got chewed out for doing it the wrong way. They approached baseball the same way. That's the mentality Gaylord absorbed and took with him into adulthood, learning to survive by whatever means necessary. Race relations. A lot of people ask why the Giants, with all those star players, didn't win more than one pennant in the 1960s, including 5 straight second-place finishes. Many have pointed to racial tensions on the team, as the Giants had numerous African-American and Latino players. But that has been overblown. Philippe Alou, Juan Marichal, Willie McCovey, and others have all insisted that the Giants had great team chemistry during those years. This was epitomized by the close friendship between Perry and Marichal. The two had much in common. Both grew up in poverty on a farm without electricity or running water, Marichal in the Dominican Republic. Both learned to play the game with make-do equipment, and both were signed by Bird Dog Scouts affiliated with the Giants. Marichal, already a star, befriended Perry in 1963 when he was really struggling, taught him the high leg kick, helped him study the hitters in the National League, and introduced him to winter ball in the Dominican Republic. For years, the two took infield and ran the outfield together between starts. Perry, in turn, was the only teammate who stayed by Marichal's side in the immediate aftermath of the ghastly John Roseboro incident in 1965, when Marichal, wielding his bat like a hatchet, hit the Dodgers catcher over the top of his head in a beanball war. Perry also developed friendships across racial boundaries with McCovey, Jim Ray Hart, Bobby Bonds, and Tito Fuentes, and they just as clearly respected and admired him. But Perry was a child of the South, segregation, and Jim Crow. Under certain circumstances, his deep-seated racial assumptions could resurface. Most notably when he played for Frank Robinson, the Major League's first Black manager in Cleveland in 1975. It was one thing to have African-American teammates, but quite another to have a Black man in such a visible position of authority. All of this, I think, broadens and complicates conventional wisdom of race relations in baseball at the time. The big trade to Cleveland for Sam McDowell following the 1971 season. Giants made a lot of bad trades. Orlando Cepeda and George Foster come to mind, but this one was right up there. Perry and his family were stunned at first. They had settled in on a real nice 3-acre spread in upscale Portola Valley with all 4 kids in school. But quickly they grew to like the trade. Gaylord became the big cheese in Cleveland, who gave him all kinds of endorsements, sweet deals, and special treatment, including doubling his salary. And in 1972, Gaylord had his best year, and one of the best years ever by a right-handed pitcher, according to Sabre legend Bill James. On a truly awful team, he went 24-16, 40 starts, 29 complete games, 343 innings, a 1.92 ERA, with 234 strikeouts, just 84 walks, and 5 shutouts. Of the 16 losses, 8 came by 1 run in low-scoring games, and in 4, the Indians failed to score at all. He was an all-star and won the Cy Young Award. Not bad for a 33-year-old pitcher deemed over the hill by the Giants. How to throw the spitter. Most pitches are thrown gripping the ball across the seams, with the ball rolling off the index and middle fingers to create backspin, right? High spin rate is the obsession of the day. But the spitter is thrown with the exact opposite objective. The index and middle fingers grip the ball between the seams and the horseshoe, on top of the foreign substance of choice, to create as little friction as possible. You squeeze the ball hard like it was an orange. Throw it just like a fastball, same speed, but with the ball rolling off the thumb to create as little spin as possible. Like squirting a watermelon seed from your fingers, as Gaylord put it. By the time it reaches the plate and gravity takes over, what looks for all the world like a waist-high or knee-high fastball drops off the table, sometimes even into the dirt. Now, there's not much video of Gaylord available, but you can see on YouTube the last pitch of his no-hitter against the Cardinals in 1968, which Curt Flood, as catcher Dick Dietz said that day, couldn't have hit with a door. Dietz also claimed later that all but 4 of Perry's pitches that game were spitters. But the pitch was illegal, Rule 8.02. So he had to hide it from the opposing players, managers, and umpires. It required not only the smarts to learn and to master it, but also the skill of an actor and the guts of a burglar. There were 3 phases of the spitter. The first, pre-1968, the true spitter era. You could go to your mouth on the mound as long as you wiped off. Then, prior to the 1968 season, MLB said you can't go to your mouth on the mound any longer, prompting Gaylord and his spitter brethren to switch to Vaseline, KY jelly, and other greasy substances, which prompted all those inspections on the mound with umpires looking for the spot where he hit it. But Gaylord could see the manager complaining to the umpire and easily wipe off before the ump walked the 60-foot 6 inches to the mound. Then the third phase, after the 1973 season, the umpire could call it at his discretion without evidence of a foreign substance. But they only called it twice in the next 10 years. Once against Don Sutton in 1978, and once against Gaylord, but not until 1982. Other spitballers of note at the time were Lou Burdett, Whitey Ford, Drysdale, Bill Singer, Don Sutton, Phil Regan, and Jim Maloney. But Gaylord was the king of them all. All along, Gaylord profited also just from the psychology of the spitter. As one writer put it, like the bomb, the threat of it became a weapon itself. McCovey told the story that once the umpires inspected him, Gaylord knew that they were unlikely to come out to the mound again. And the very next pitch would be a super duper dipsy doodle, as he liked to put it. The cat and mouse games Perry played on the mound drove opponents crazy. On one occasion, Yankee manager Ralph Houck lost it so completely that he exploded from the dugout straight to the mound, jerked Perry's cap from his head, stomped on it, and kicked it around the infield until the umpires led him away. Perry, as usual, walked away uncharged, unfined, and unflappable. Batters fixated on Gaylord's gyrations on the mound. The rapid-fire decoys before every pitch, game after game, year after year, defined Perry, wiping his forehead with his thumb, back and forth, pinching the bill of his cap, twice patting the hair behind his right ear, back to the cap, and then the only variable move, swiping some part of his uniform. He was a master craftsman. His lifelong sibling rivalry with Jim. His whole life, Gaylord never seemed to be able to escape Jim's shadow. Growing up on the farm, they were together virtually every minute of every day and night, working in the fields and sleeping in the same bed. 3 years older, Jim was the favored one, and he was smarter, better liked in school, better looking. Jim has hair, Gaylord didn't. More practically minded. When the kids played ball, Gaylord got to play only if not enough older boys showed up. Otherwise, they used him to chase down foul balls in the woods. Both were stars in high school, but Jim's stats were better. Jim became a top starter with the Indians just 3 years after just 3 years in the minors. Gaylord was up and down for 6 years. After a lull in his career, Jim went 24-12 in 1970 for the Twins and won the American League Cy Young Award, while Gaylord that same year went 23-13 and came in second in the voting in the National League. And Jim went to college in the offseason, graduated, and became a highly successful businessman in Minneapolis after baseball, while Gaylord went back to the farm and went bankrupt in 1986. The major exception to this came when Jim signed with the Indians in 1956 for $4,000, and Gaylord, after MLB changed the bonus rules, signed for $73,500. But that too fanned the flames of passion and resentment between them. After Jim left high school, the two brothers rarely spoke to each other. One of Gaylord's daughters told me that she could count on one hand the number of times the two families had crossed paths over the years. Gaylord's legacy. Perry's legacy is at once simple and complicated. His Hall of Fame numbers notwithstanding, Gaylord will always be associated first and foremost with the spitter. That much is simple. What's complicated is how that legacy has been perceived and how it has changed over time. Consider longtime Washington Post sports writer Tom Boswell, who I think epitomizes this. Starting in the 1980s and for years thereafter, Boswell wrote about cheating in baseball, and Gaylord Perry in particular, whimsically. Let it be said, he once emphasized, that cheating is baseball's oldest profession. No other game is so rich in skullduggery, so suited for it, and so proud of it. At the time, Boswell could not have envisioned what performance-enhancing drugs and high-tech cheating would do to baseball. The lessons of the PED era and the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal have dramatically altered what many are willing to tolerate. After Major League Baseball found the Astros guilty in January 2020 and punished the organization with suspended executives, lost draft picks, and multi-million-dollar fines, Boswell seemed to admonish himself, his earlier self, as well as the steroid takers and sign stealers. Cheating ruins everything about sports, he wrote. We are now forced to see the cheaters not as mere rascals and rule benders, but as profoundly selfish and destructive people whose lack of a moral compass cannot be shrugged off with rationalizations that make us feel comfortable. No longer whimsical, to be sure. Every year since steroid candidates began appearing on the Hall of Fame ballot, I believe it was 2007, the issue gets thrust to the surface when the voting gets announced in January. Via top radio, blogs, podcasts, and the like, defenders of PED users often demand an answer to what they call the Gaylord-Perry question. If a known, indeed confessed cheater remains in the Hall of Fame, then how does one keep out Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens? We all have to come to grips with this in our own way. But that, I believe, that his entanglement in that debate is now Gaylord-Perry's chief legacy, at least for the foreseeable future. He is a fascinating historical figure. The book is written for a broad range of audiences. First and foremost, readers who love baseball and who love history. Those with a passion for the game who are not scared off by historical arguments or footnotes. In other words, folks just like you all. I'd be glad to field whatever questions you might have.
Dave, that was tremendous. I want to first thank Bill Schiffner. Bill turned me on to your book, said there's this new book out by David Vaught on Gaylord-Perry, and that's how I got in touch with you. So, Bill, thank you. I see you down there. Couple of things that I'd like to ask and a couple of comments. What I love most about it is there really are no books on him, so this is going to be a terrific read. I saw that the book was released November of 2022, and he passed away the following month. Any idea if he saw the book at its completion or anything like that?
I very much doubt it. Gaylord didn't have a big role in the book. I interviewed him early on, like really early on, probably 2009 or so, mostly about farming, because people who grew up like him leave the farm and become successful very rarely want to come back to the farm. He was very interested. Nobody's ever asked him about that before. But when it came time to actually do the biography, she chose not to participate. I did, however, interview several members of his family, several people in the area from where he grew up. That's how I got most of my information regarding his upbringing.
That's great. And, just on a couple of, I guess, funny notes, I remember, and I'm sure Norm probably has it, there was one of the baseball cards, and they had the caricatures on the back, and you'd see the caricature of Gaylord-Perry with a handful of grease. And that always stuck in my mind. And the movie Major League, they had a pitcher named Harris.
He looked like Gaylord-Perry. Yeah.
He looked like Gaylord-Perry, and he would go through the whole idea, what he's little KY here, little Vaseline here. And whenever I see that movie, it reminds me of Gaylord-Perry. But David, again, I forgot to ask, your book, best way to get it. Amazon, talk to us.
Right now, Amazon's the cheapest.
Okay, so Amazon, just look up The Spitter. All right, we got the great Daner. Dan, you are up.
Thanks, Gary. David, very interesting talk, and it's probably almost impossible to research Gaylord-Perry and come up with a boring story. He's just a really compelling figure, and baseball could really use probably some more people like that, just from a marketing standpoint, whether you like them or not. I'm curious, since you brought up steroids. When I've interviewed people from that era, they have a lot of opinions about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. Some think that steroids was no big deal. Others really think that they should not be in the Hall of Fame. Did you ever encounter, since it sounds like you didn't talk with Gaylord Perry about this topic, but did you encounter any quote or anything from him on how he felt about Barry Bonds and steroids? Did he think that they should be banned from the Hall of Fame, or was he more easygoing on it?
There comes to mind, I don't remember exactly what it was, but a news magazine article where he, probably about 2015 or so, where he was asked about whether or not the steroid users should be in the Hall of Fame. And at first he made kind of a non-committal answer, and he made a joke about it. And then he was asked, would you have taken steroids had they been available during your career? And that just threw him into a tizzy. He was extremely upset and cut off the interview right away. So my guess is that he goes back and forth. He's going back and forth on Pete Rose. So I don't know if there is a definitive answer to that question. But he certainly doesn't think that throwing the spitter, both of them are cheating, and to some degree, but he certainly doesn't think that throwing the spitter is somehow equivalent to injecting yourself with PED.
Great to hear from you again, Great Daner. The judge, you were up.
Thanks, Gary. I really enjoyed that. Gaylord's always been one of my favorite Giants. I know you described him as grumpy. I got to say, I had a chance to meet him in Scottsdale at the spring training one year. Got a chance to spend about 15 minutes with him, and he was just very generous with his time, and just I caught him in a real good mood, because it was just a great interaction with him. But my question had to do with he had such remarkable success, as you say, almost right away once he started throwing the spitter. We talked about that game against the Mets and then going on. But and you named some other pitchers who may have thrown the spitter. You didn't mention. I didn't think you mentioned any other Giants, and I was just wondering if there's any talk. What I would wonder if one of his other teammates, seeing him have this success, would try to also throw the spitter. Any information on that?
Well, let me first address that he wasn't immediately successful with the spitter. He had a good year the first year he used it, and in '64, I believe we went 12-8. It was by far his best year. But in '65, he went back to have a really bad year. I think he was 8-12, ERA over 4. He had not yet, in his mind or in his actions, he had not yet fully committed to the pitch. He was still thinking of it as kind of a bridge. He was trying to learn how to throw the slider. It wasn't until the following year, '66, when he had his first career big breakout year. So there was a lag between this famous doubleheader and when his career actually took off. As far as other Giants, I know that the one person that comes to mind is Marichal admitted to trying to throw the spitter, but the nature of the pitch puts a tremendous strain on your arm. And Marichal said, he immediately felt a twinge and never tried it again. It takes an extraordinarily strong hands and large hands to throw it effectively. and strong arms. The kind of strength you get from growing up as a sharecropper. So I can't think off the top of my head of any other contemporary giants who threw it, except of course Bob Shaw, who he learned, who was his tutor on the Giants in '64. And Shaw threw a tremendous spitter and had absolutely no conscience about it. He's the one who really convinced Gaylord, not just showed him the mechanics of it, but convinced him that, you know, this is your career that we're talking about here. And Shaw was really Gaylord's saving grace. But other than Shaw, I can't think of another person who threw it.
All right, and I know you got a lot of hands up, but if I can ask one more quick one, because I was 12 or 13 when they traded him, and first trade that I remember being just really upset, ruined my winter. But what prompted that? That was a horrible trade. Was there some personality thing? And it just, I mean, Perry McDowell was bad.
It was a large portion of it was Charlie Fox, the Giants manager, who was infatuated with Sam McDowell, and in fact urged the Giants to sign McDowell, 10 years earlier. And when by that time, there were already signs that McDowell was having arm problems
And drinking.
And of course, there were even bigger signs that he was an alcoholic. But Fox, they wanted McDowell was left-handed, much rarer commodity, and he was about, if I remember correctly, he was 4 or 5 years younger than Perry at the time. But of course, McDowell flamed out almost immediately.
Yeah, horrible trade. Okay, thank you so much, and I'll let others go. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. All right, before I continue, we're going to go Bill Klink, then Ed, Harvey, Bill Schiffner, Paul, Russ, and Howard. Bill Klink, you are up.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, David. Boy, I'll tell you, I learned an awful lot here about Gaylord Perry, and I appreciate the commonality that he had with Marischal. I guess a lot of us maybe overlooked that their upbringing. They also shared one other thing in common, although Marischal did his 6 years before, and that, of course, was the no-hitter. I'm fortunate to have the actual program from that no-hitter I got from one of my fraternity brothers who never missed a Cardinal game. So therefore, he saw both back-to-back games. I was going to say, in that game, you did say, am I getting this right? All but 4 of the pitches were likely spitters.
And his no-hitter?
Yeah.
That comes right out of the mouth of his catcher.
Oh, from Haller. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
not Haller. It was Dick D.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't check my own scorebook on that one. Yeah, that was Dietz who caught that game.
But he was in his first, let's say his last years with the Giants, 66 to 71, and then his years with the Indians.
Yeah.
He was throwing the spitter, whether it was actual spit or grease.
Yeah.
He could have games where he didn't need to throw it, didn't throw it very often, but he also had games where he threw it almost exclusively. And he was never, once he really mastered the pitch, he was never afraid, in fact, to the contrary, relished the notion of throwing it at a crucial time of the game. People on base.
94 pitches in that game.
Yeah.
78 pitches and
Yeah.
lost 1-0.
Take a look at that. You can find the video on YouTube of the last pitch.
Okay.
You get a really good idea. It's the camera's behind the plate, and you get a really good idea of how much the pitch breaks.
Yeah, it was a called strike, so obviously flood just was frozen by that. But did you ever get any indication? That was a night game. Did you ever get any indication that the spitter worked better at night over day from him?
Well, that brings up an interesting occurrence. And he went to the All-Star game in 1966, and he noticed that this was Koufax's last year, you know, and he noticed that Koufax was in the training room getting rubbed down with this gel called capsulin, which is made from red hot peppers. And of course, Koufax needed it to keep his arm loose. But Perry saw that and said, oh my God, I could use that at night, at the night games at Candlestick Park and still sweat, because sweating, of course, helped him with the spitter. And I can't impress upon you how hot and uncomfortable this ointment is. And he used it every game for the rest of his career. I mean, I have a chapter that opens up when he gets traded from Cleveland to the Texas Rangers, where the trainer for Cleveland is giving the trainer, his counterpart in Texas, all the stuff he needs, the gloves, the tubes. This is what you have to do. He needs 2 tubes to start, and he needs a refresher in the 5th inning. Anybody who just touches the stuff, your fingers start to blister. So it's just really a sort of an incredible.
One other short question. You mentioned later, obviously, after his career, he struggled financially. I know one of the jobs that he had, he was a coach with Limestone College. Did he use that? Was that an idea to try to augment income? That because I wondered about him being a coach and all.
Yeah, that was right after the bankruptcy.
Oh, okay.
He tried a salesman's job, you know, wearing a coat and tie, and he couldn't do that.
No.
So he took this job for like $20,000 a year. Limestone College then had about 500 students. It didn't even have a baseball field when he started, and he built the program up and made it into an NAIA really good team.
Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Bill. Ed Freer, you are up.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing I want to mention was I was at that doubleheader from batting practice. So when Del Crandall hit the hit in the top of the 23rd of the second game, and there, you know, from the 70,000, there were only about 5,000 of us left. But I can remember thinking of Gaylord Perry. I was a sophomore in high school, and I'm saying, he's an old guy, looking at him. And now when I think of it all in perspective, he was just 9 years older than me at the time. So that's perspective. The question I was going to ask, and it's kind of like what Bill just asked, his competitiveness when he went bankrupt, did that help him? The competitive feature when he was down on his dumps.
I mean, in a way, it hurt him, and hurt farmers in general. So agriculture is more so than most industry is highly susceptible to the constant interaction between supply and demand. So in the 1970s, when Gaylord bought his farm first time and started growing soybeans and corn and the like, farming was booming. And when farming is booming like that, farmers think they got to expand, right, to take advantage of it. The more you grow, the thinking is the more you grow, the more you're going to make. But of course, when everybody thinks that way, that results in overproduction. And it's there, the ebb and flow of. So in the 1980s, and there are other reasons for this, political reasons too, but the 1980s was probably the worst, one of the worst farm depressions in American history. And I believe it was 1 out of 5 farmers in North Carolina went under in the 1980s, and he was one of them. And he tried to, in essence, because of his competitiveness, tried to produce his way out of it. But it just kept making it worse and worse.
Thank you, Ed.
Okay.
Mr. Weinberg, you are up.
David, that was a wonderful presentation. Your description of Gaylord going to the bill of his cap and then going to his face in rapid succession reminded me of a film piece. I can't remember if it was 65 or 66. Somehow it might have been not game of the week, This Week in Baseball, if it was being broadcast, which showed Gaylord doing that, going to his face, in rapid fire succession. And then the camera angle was from the side, and they zeroed in on his 2 fingers when he would go to wipe it off on his uniform. And clearly you could see that the 2 fingers were not touching the uniform.
Just raise them up a little bit. Yeah.
That's right. And it was driving the batters crazy. The other quick thing, I don't know if it's in your book, Gaylord the batter was a lousy hitter. And the story goes that I think it was Alvin Dark said man would land on the moon before Perry would hit a home run. And on July 20th, 1969, 20 minutes before the Eagle landed on the moon, Gaylord hit a home run. I love Gaylord Perry. When he was traded, it was the beginning of my confusion. Thanks, David, for.
He was also traded because his salary had gotten, what was considered a high salary then. And the Giants in 1971 were already in deep financial trouble. And McDowell made a lower salary. That was also part of the reason.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harvey. Bill, again, thank you for sending me the information on the book. You're up, Bill.
I had never seen a book on Perry before, and I gotta say, what a tremendous! Everybody in the group should read this book. It's everybody, if you're especially a San Francisco Giants fan, and we're upset by that trade and everything. I'm just saying, you really did your research was great. I mean, to talk about from his upbringing for everything. So I just want to say thank you for coming to speak with us, and I just thought it's a great book. But why? I really didn't, I came across it in the library. When did it come out? Like last year?
It came out in early November of 2022, although its copyright is 2023. But it came out at the beginning of November.
And there are no other books on Perry, right? Most of your research, you obviously got to talk to his family, but also you could talk about, one thing you didn't mention was his tragic, with his wife being killed in a car accident, which I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
His first wife. And they was childhood sweethearts and everything.
Yeah, that was why he had just gone to Limestone College. And it's the wife, his longtime partner, the day before her first grandchild was born, she had driven down to Florida to be with the mother, and the next day was on her way back to the hospital and had a horrible car accident on the freeway.
It's a shame.
Tremendously tragic. Gaylord also lost his dad in a boating accident just a few years later, and his only son, Gaylord Jackson Jr., died of leukemia in 2005. So he had a real tragic post-career life there. But just from a from a writer's standpoint, when you're doing a biography of a sports person, this is going to sound a little selfish, but it's really helpful and important that the person has an interesting life after they retire.
Right.
Because of course they're only 40 years old when they retire. And then what do you do if they're just boring, after that? But his life was nothing, not till the very end, was not boring.
But anyway, thank you. And I think you did a fantastic job.
I really
Great book.
appreciate your comments.
Mr. Paul, you are up.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much. That was just really, really terrific. It's funny how I listened to the judge talk about hearing the trade to Cleveland. And I remember, if I'm not mistaken, because I was heartbroken by that trade also, watching, I think, Sam McDowell throw with the Giants against the Mets. I think that was his first game. It was on TV on Channel 9. And I seem to remember that and just hoping that, oh my goodness, I hope McDowell can do well at the time. Obviously it didn't work out. But my question on Perry is really about the enforcement of the rule in terms of the spitter. Did he in fact ever get caught by the umpires, and was he ever punished for those transgressions?
No umpire ever found the foreign substance on his person. One instance, in 1 year before he retired, 1982, the umpire used, because the rule had changed earlier, the umpire used his discretion and said that's an illegal pitch. But they never found the stuff on him, not once. And umpires, the reason that more people didn't get thrown out of the game was the umpires wanted no part of that responsibility. I mean, when they first changed the rule that the umpire could just use their discretion, the spring training of that year, umpires started to assert themselves, and then they'd become the story after the game, and everybody wanted to interview them, and umpires don't want any part of that. So it was, they never enforced it.
Well, thank you. And the other last question I have for you: if we buy your book, do we need to wear latex gloves to read it? Thank you so much.
Russ, you are up. David, are you okay with time? We have about 3 or 4 more questions.
Sure.
Great. Russ,
this will be a quick one. David, I wonder if you had heard a rumor. I heard, years ago, that the National League umpires were so fed up with having to deal with Gaylord, his spitball, going out and checking him and so forth and so on, that they demanded to the National League president, who I think was maybe Chubb Feeney at the time, maybe not, but they demanded to the league president that he forced the Giants to trade Gaylord Perry to an American League team. I wonder if you had run across any kind of rumors like that in your research.
I did not. I don't believe that. I would say pretty strongly that I seriously doubt that was true. It is true, however, when he was traded to the American League, when all the shenanigans that he went through in the National League, the American League was way worse with the umpires checking him out and dressing him down out on the mound, because they had managers like Billy Martin and Ralph Houck and who are also just trying to rattle Gaylord by going out to the mound. And I don't, can you envision, when he was out there and they would take off his cap and check behind his ears and check his belt buckle and really undress him. But that just all helped him. It was all part of the con. It just made the batters focus all the much less on his pitching and focus almost exclusively on all of his shenanigans. It was brilliant. And so original. I mean, there's just nothing else like it.
And One comment is that when Gaylord got inducted onto the Wall of Fame at Oracle, he had taped a jar of Vaseline under every seat of all the people that attended. So there was they all taped, they taped that jar of Vaseline underneath every seat for all the attendees. I thought that was a great little, great little trick.
Yes,
Thank
but that was at the unveiling of his statue at whatever they called it then, AT&T Park. But that it points to
Yeah.
it points to something in him, a conflict within him, that on the one hand, he didn't want to be known anymore just for the spitter. He wanted to be known as a good pitcher, as a great pitcher. But he also knew that his fame was the result of the spitter. So that business of putting taping the Vaseline underneath the chair, up to that point, it had been a very civilized, serious ceremony. And he ended up, sort of undermining that by doing that Vaseline business. He was caught between wanting to be remembered for it and wanting not to be remembered for it.
Thank you, Russ. Howard, you were up.
Very good job, Dave. Two quick comments and a question. I was interested in your first statement when you talked about Tom Howler being the one who told Gaylord to, maybe it's time. I was just wondering if his brother Bill Howler was behind home plate, if Tom still would have done that. But of course, Bill was in the American League at the time. But it was kind of interesting that you mentioned Tom Howler, and I'm thinking of Bill Howler as being behind home plate at any given game, but not that time. I respected Gaylord. We all knew he was cheating. But when other pitchers were cheating, God, did I hate that. And I think specifically of Joe Negro, who had the chutzpah to throw a nail file down in front of the umpire. And then, of course, being a Met fan, Mike Scott in '86 in the playoffs. And he was kind of like Gaylord, and he never admitted to anything, scuffing up the baseball, but everybody knew he was doing it. And he turned from a very mediocre pitcher to suddenly Cy Young, in that series. And thankfully, the Mets, they were scared to death of him, as you probably remember. And they did pull out that final game, the sixth game of the series. They didn't have to face Mike Scott again. My question to you is, you mentioned Gaylord's relationship with the Latino players and the African-American players. You never mentioned Willie Mays. What was his relationship like with Willie Mays?
Well, he always refers to Mays as the best player he ever played with. And Mays, in the 60s there, Mays was really sort of an on-the-field manager. It was the pitchers went to Mays to ask him about how to pitch to various hitters that day. They didn't go to the manager, the pitching coach. They went to Mays. But Mays was also, a loner socially. So Perry was just like most of his other teammates, not good friends with Mays, because none of them were good friends with Mays. Mays was really sort of a loner socially.
Okay, thanks for the info. I was unaware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Mars, you were up.
Mars, maybe fell asleep.
Mars looks like he's sleeping.
I dozed off.
Dave, I got a quick question for you. I don't know if it's addressed in the book. When did the Giants welcome him back? As far as he was the statue, the working for the teams, et cetera, and was it Peter McGowan?
Well, that's an interesting question because for years the Giants pretty much abandoned Gaylord, and after all, Gaylord was never the ace of the team. The majority of his wins and then strikeouts came after he left the Giants. So he had no real close connection to to the team, even after he got into the Hall of Fame. In fact, a lot of the San Francisco sports writers didn't think he belonged in the Hall of Fame. But the Giants were in the early 2000s were, you're talking about Peter McGowan and Larry Baer, they're really sort of marketing geniuses, and especially at being able to sort of weave together the generations of fans of San Francisco. And the other four Hall of Famers from the San Francisco Giants, Mays, McCovey, Cepeda, and Marichal, all had their numbers retired immediately after they got into the Hall of Fame. And later, when they started building the statues, all had their statues up almost immediately. It took Gaylord another 15 years before, I believe it was 2005 that the Giants retired his number. And his statue not until 2000, I think it was 2016 or 17. So there was always kind of they sort of wanted him, didn't want him relationship.
Thank you. All right, we got time.
He
I'm
was
sorry, go
great.
ahead.
Gaylord was great PR. I mean, he was this old, Southern good old boy with knew how to spin a good yarn, keep people interested.
All right, we're gonna have two more. We're gonna go to Rick Swig. Rick, unmute, and then Michael Frank. Rick, are you with us still? All right, let's go to Michael Frank. Michael Frank, you were up.
I'm just very surprised that nobody remembered the book he wrote. I think he was in his later years with Cleveland, called Me and the Spitter. I remember reading it. I don't keep them anymore, but everybody said there was never a book about him before.
Thank you for thanks for letting us know that, Michael. I thought I remembered that title, but there's really, not much on Gaylord Perry, and David's book, is going to hit home with.
Nobody had written a biography of Gaylord before. That was his book was more of it was written halfway through his career, and it was, for lack of a better word, an autobiography.
Tom Flynn is showing you the cover. David, listen, we cannot thank you enough. And again, here's for anybody, his brand new book that came out in November of 2022. Again, David said the best way is probably through Amazon. David, listen, let's give it up for David Vaught.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Dave, don't be a stranger, man, okay? If any of these other topics come up that are interest of you, please hop aboard, okay?
Okay.
Guys, have a great night. We will reconvene probably in 2 weeks. It'll be on a Wednesday with Thomas Brown. It is in conjunction to Willie Mays saying goodbye to America with the Mets on his retirement, Willie Mays night at Shea Stadium. So for the rest of you, Happy New Year if you're celebrating. Go Giants, and I'm going to shut this down, and if anybody wants to talk Giant baseball, we'll be here for a while. Dave, thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
Be well.
Thanks.
Gary,